You know, for someone with an intellect like yours, you've probably looked at the whole celebrity thing and thought, like, what's the real deal here?
Right.
What makes it tick?
Yeah, totally.
So today, we're going beyond the usual Elizabeth Taylor story. We're not just going to list off her husbands or anything like that. We're diving deep, deep down to understand how someone reaches that level of fame.
Like, what are the forces that create these massive stars?
Exactly. And to guide our deep dive, we've got William J. Mann's biography, How to Be a Movie Star.
A fantastic book, really gets into the nitty-gritty of Hollywood's golden age.
And it's not just gossip, right? We're going to use this book to unpack the system, the public perception, all of it through her experiences.
It's like a blueprint for how to manufacture fame. Fascinating stuff.
So we're basically going to, reverse engineer Elizabeth Taylor's stardom.
Exactly.
Oh.
Figure out how that celebrity machine worked. And I mean, to really understand a phenomenon this big, we got to start at the beginning.
Okay, so take us back. Where does it all begin for her?
Well, the book makes a really strong case that it all starts with the studio system.
Okay, the studio system, right?
Specifically, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM.
Yeah.
They weren't just making movies, they were building the whole business of Hollywood.
They were creating stars.
Yes, cultivating them, I guess you
Yeah.
could say. And Elizabeth Taylor was, like, inducted into that world so young.
It's wild to think about.
It is. And they didn't just, throw a cute kid in front of a camera and hope for the best. They had a whole system in place to train these kids.
Like actual training.
Oh, absolutely. The book talks about how she was essentially molded by these studio experts, even Hedda Hopper,
Oh, yeah. The gossip columnist.
Super powerful woman. Her word could make or break careers. And she was an early champion of Elizabeth Taylor, called her one of the most beautiful children I've ever seen.
Wow. High praise coming from her.
Oh, yeah. And it was all part of the studio's plan, building that buzz from a young age.
It's fascinating, though, because even with all this, constructed image making, the book mentions how Taylor wanted to not live a lie in the press.
Huh. Yeah. Kind of a contradiction, right? Trying to be authentic in a completely manufactured environment.
Right. So how did they actually, nurture these young stars?
Well, there was this thing called the Little Red Schoolhouse. It wasn't actually red, which is interesting, but it was where all the child actors went.
Like their own little school?
Yeah, a school just for MGM's young talent. People like Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland, Roddy McDowall, they all went there.
So they were getting, an actual education while also learning to be performers?
Exactly. It wasn't just acting classes. They had dancing, voice lessons, the whole works. Imagine learning calculus and then going straight to a tap dancing class.
Wow, that's some serious multitasking.
Right. And it wasn't just formal training either. The studio was always looking for ways to keep their stars in the public eye.
Publicity stunts, all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. The book mentions how she even walked a chipmunk on a leash for a publicity event.
The chipmunk on a leash.
I know, right? Sounds crazy. But it's all carefully planned to maintain public interest and shape her image. Early brand management, basically.
It's crazy to think about. Talk about a different kind of childhood.
Oh, for sure. And the book uses this phrase, it's pretty stark, but it calls these young stars chattel.
Chattel. That's intense.
Yeah, it really gets at how much control the studio had over their lives. Where they went, what they did, their whole career trajectory, the studio was calling the shots.
And obviously that had to impact their sense of a normal childhood, right?
Oh, absolutely. The book even talks about how she clashed with Louis B. Mayer.
The big boss man at MGM.
Exactly. He was notoriously tough, but even as a teenager, Taylor stood up to him, showed a bit of that independent spirit early on.
Makes you wonder if she always had that in her.
Maybe so.
Oh.
And she was definitely aware of the potential downsides of this whole system.
How so?
Well, the book mentions how she made a comment about Judy Garland, not surviving the pressure of the studio system.
Wow. That's a pretty insightful observation coming from someone going through the same thing.
Totally. Like she was already analyzing the whole fame game at that age.
So moving on from her childhood, how did the studio manage her image as she got older?
Well, they really leaned into the romance angle. It was a deliberate tactic to keep the public engaged with her.
Oh, yeah, the studio orchestrated romances.
Exactly, like that prom date with Bob Precht, and then the whole thing with the baseball player, Ralph Kinkner.
It sounds like they were basically scripting her love life.
In a way, yeah. They wanted to position her as America's sweetheart, always on the verge of getting married.
Like the girl next door, but on a grand scale.
Exactly. Dick Clayton, a Hollywood insider, even said that the studio decided Liz should get married to coincide with the release of Father of the Bride.
Wow, so they were intentionally blurring the lines between her on-screen roles and her real life.
It was all part of the image they were building.
So they had a hand in her early marriages too, right? The book mentions that.
Oh, yeah, especially the first one with Nikki Hilton. The studio saw those marriages as extensions of her public persona, reinforcing that whole romantic ideal they'd created.
But then, of course, the whole thing with Hilton falls apart.
And then her affair with Stanley Donen comes out.
And the public, I mean, they didn't take that well, right?
No, not at all. People felt like they'd been betrayed, like that whole fairy tale they'd bought into had been shattered.
It's interesting how invested people get in those celebrity
For
narratives.
sure. And the studio really scrambled to try and manage that scandal. They tried to rebrand her.
How so?
Well, they started pushing this image of her as a more independent, modern girl,
Yeah.
trying to appeal to a different audience maybe,
And then she marries Michael Wilding,
which a lot of people saw as a very calculated move to repair her image.
like a way to regain some respectability.
Exactly. Another Hollywood guy, Dick Clayton, he said Wilding fixed everything.
Wow. So he was seen as like the solution to the problem?
Kind of, yeah. He represented stability, traditional values, but even then there was still doubts.
And a hopper, right. She wasn't buying it.
Nope. She was still suspicious of Wilding, publicly questioned their relationship. She saw herself as, like, a guardian of Hollywood morality.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the book points out this contrast between the image they projected, the perfect couple in their beautiful Beverly Hills home, and the reality, which is probably much more complicated.
Right, behind closed doors.
Exactly.
So up to this point, it's all been like building up to this massive shift in her fame.
Right. The Liz and Dick era.
The Richard Burton affair.
On the set of Cleopatra in Rome, it was like, boom, the whole world was suddenly obsessed.
I mean, what made this particular scandal so captivating?
Well, both of them were already huge stars.
And they were both married to other people.
Yeah, it was very public, very flagrant. And then you have the backdrop of Rome, this whole glamorous, exotic setting.
It was like a real-life soap opera.
Totally. And the media frenzy was unbelievable. The book talks about how paparazzi were going crazy trying to get the first photo of them together.
It must have been chaos.
Oh, it was. There's even this description of the scene outside Bricktop's nightclub in Rome, like a mob scene.
Wow. And what about Hedda Hopper? How did she react to all of this?
Oh, she was furious. Called Taylor a Hollywood homewrecker.
Wow.
Yeah. She felt personally betrayed, like Taylor had ruined this image she'd helped create. And she thought it would damage the reputation of Hollywood itself.
Interesting. So she was worried about the moral implications.
Right, the bigger picture.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, Taylor and Burton are living this lavish lifestyle in Rome. They had a villa on the Appian Way, which Taylor famously called a dump.
A dump.
Yeah, I know, right? But it just added to the whole spectacle. The public was eating it up.
It must have been such a strange experience to have your life be this public spectacle.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then there's the dynamic between Taylor and Burton themselves. It was different from her other relationships.
How-
Well, Eddie Fisher always seemed kind of in awe of her fame. But Burton, he treated her differently. He called her Lumpy. Imagine that.
Lumpy.
Yeah, like a nickname. He didn't put her on a pedestal. And he was a very intellectual guy, successful in his own right. He wasn't intimidated by her fame at all.
So it was more of an equal partnership.
Right. And the book quotes Tom Mankiewicz. He said, "Men wanted to be Richard, and women wanted to sleep with Richard."
Mm-hmm.
He had this charisma.
So how did the studio handle this whole situation? They must have been freaking out.
Oh, totally. They were caught in this weird position. On the one hand, they were afraid of boycotts, the moral outrage, all that. But they also knew that there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Especially when it's this big.
Exactly. And then, of course, that photo of them kissing gets leaked.
The one that confirmed the whole affair.
Yep. And it just exploded from there.
Right.
The paparazzis were relentless. They were hiding under cars, following them everywhere. It was crazy.
And Bricktop's nightclub became, like, the center of it all.
Yeah, this focal point for their whole romance. The book argues that this whole era, it marked a turning point. It's when we really enter the modern era of celebrity, and Taylor and Burton are right at the heart of it.
So they essentially changed the game.
It was a new level of fame, one that no one had really seen before. Tom Mankiewicz said, and I'm quoting here, "No one, and I mean no one, has ever had that kind of fame quotient."
It's hard to even imagine. But amidst all the drama, the book also sheds light on her personal qualities. It's not all just scandal.
Absolutely. People who knew her talked about her kindness, her generosity. Mike Nichols called her the most democratic soul. George Cukor, he simply said she was simple kindness itself. In Tom Mankiewicz, he noticed how she could spot a phony a mile away.
So despite all the fame, there was a genuine side to her.
It seems so. And she really tried, to be authentic, to not live a lie. It couldn't have been easy in her position.
And the book also talks about how she dealt with Mike Todd's death.
That was a huge tragedy. Her grief was apparently devastating.
So behind that public persona, there was real depth of feeling.
Definitely. And the book also mentions how she relied on Dr. Max Jacobson.
Dr. Feelgood, right?
Yeah, the guy who was giving all these celebrities injections. It kind of shows the pressure she was under, and the lengths she went to keep up with her demanding schedule.
It's a reminder that even with all that fame, there were still vulnerabilities.
For sure. And then there was the whole Eddie Fisher situation.
Oh, yeah. The public reaction to that was so intense.
Oh, it was huge. People were sending her hate mail, making voodoo dolls.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
It's interesting how people felt so personally invested in her life.
It's like they felt they had a right to judge her choices.
And how did Debbie Reynolds, Fisher's ex-wife, handle it all?
With incredible grace, apparently.
Really?
Yeah. The book contrasts that with Taylor's approach, which was much more direct and sometimes, a bit insensitive.
I guess that blunt honesty could rub people the wrong way.
It definitely did. The book even includes this quote from Taylor where she says Debbie never really had it.
No. Ouch.
Yeah, not very tactful. But it does show her competitive side,
And even while married to Fisher, there were rumors of other affairs, right?
Right, suggesting she might have been restless, not fully satisfied.
So it wasn't just about the drama. She also had a really sharp business sense, didn't she?
Oh, absolutely. She knew her worth. That $1 million deal for Cleopatra, that was groundbreaking.
And she got a percentage of the gross, too.
Yeah, which was unheard of at the time, especially for a woman. It was a real power move.
She changed the game.
Totally. And the studio, they were smart about it. They saw how the public was fascinated by her bad girl image, so they leaned into it.
Like with Butterfield 8?
Exactly. The marketing for that movie was very deliberately provocative. They were playing on her reputation.
So they adapted their strategy to fit the public's perception.
Exactly. And then you have that whole incident in London when she got really sick.
There were even rumors that she had died.
Yeah, it was all over the news.
Yeah.
And it's crazy, but that whole ordeal actually ended up boosting her image. Yeah. Created this whole narrative, the brushed with death, the comeback. People love that kind of stuff.
It's strange how those things can work.
It is. And the book even talks about how a U.S. Congresswoman, Iris Blitch, condemned Taylor and Burton on the floor of Congress.
On the floor of Congress.
I know. It's crazy. They'd become this, political issue. Shows just how huge they were. And Taylor, she didn't back down. She famously said, "I hate America and America hates me."
Very dramatic.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
But that kind of defiance, it had consequences. George Stevens, the director, he was considering her for the role of Mary Magdalene, but he ended up dropping her because of all the negative publicity.
So even with all her fame, there were still limits.
Exactly. Sometimes the controversy overshadowed her talent. But there's this quote from a columnist, Ruth Waterbury. She said Taylor had the courage to be herself.
I like that.
Me too. And you see that courage in her later work, like with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
That was a pretty intense movie.
Oh, yeah. And the book mentions how she fought to change a particular scene in the script.
Why was that?
She felt it wasn't true to the character. She was really committed to the integrity of the performance. And she even had some doubts about her appearance as Martha, the wig and all that.
So even as a huge star, she was still concerned about those details.
Absolutely. She cared about the craft, not just the fame.
And the filming of that movie, it was a huge media circus, right?
Oh, yeah. There were crowds everywhere. They even had to use these musical houses during filming to try and avoid the paparazzi.
Musical houses? What are those?
Basically, they would film in different houses, and they would play music really loud to drown out the sound of the cameras.
Wow, that's dedication.
It was crazy. But she nailed the performance, won an Oscar for it.
So she proved she was more than just a tabloid sensation.
Exactly.
But even with all the fame, the book still shows her enjoying the simple things.
Yeah, like her love of food and wine. She never lost that.
It's nice to see that human side of her.
It is. And after 1968, there's a noticeable shift in her priorities. She seems less interested in the whole Hollywood scene and more focused on her personal life and her jewels.
Oh, yeah, the jewel.
She had this incredible collection, the Krupp diamond, for instance. And she turned those acquisitions into these big events.
Like she was putting on a show.
In a way, yeah. And she saw herself as a custodian of those jewels.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was more than just owning them. It was about preserving them, showcasing them.
Like they were part of her legacy.
Exactly. And she was smart about leveraging her fame, too. She launched perfume lines, jewelry lines.
A true businesswoman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can't forget her work as an AIDS activist.
That was huge. She used her platform to raise awareness and fight stigma.
She really made a difference. And then, of course, there's her final triumph on Broadway with The Little Foxes.
A fitting end to an amazing career.
And her playbill, it just said one word: star.
Perfect. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the takeaway here? What explains Elizabeth Taylor's enduring fame?
It's a complex mix of factors, right?
Yeah.
You have the studio system, her public image, the relationships, her talent, and this willingness to be herself, even when the whole world was watching.
It's like all these pieces came together to create something truly unique.
Exactly. It's a fascinating case study in how fame works.
And it makes you wonder, in today's world with social media and everything, what would someone like Elizabeth Taylor look like?
That's a good question.
I mean, how would they navigate this constant online scrutiny? Could they even achieve that same level of stardom?
Yeah, it's a different world now.
It definitely makes you think.